So I'd like to, again, ask how our food choices affect these questions. So here's four more things I'd like to understand better. One, isn't it natural for an animal to provide milk? It's what's wrong with us going and milking a cow and getting its milk? It might not hurt them to just get the milk. They've been doing it on farms for a long time. Second, is it true that only pregnant cows provide milk? We all think that cows have milk. Are we saying that a cow actually doesn't have milk unless they're impregnated? Third, are we saying that cows do or don't have antibiotics? Do they add antibiotics to cows? So when we have dairy products, are there antibiotics added to it? And then finally, fish farms, are they adding antibiotics to that? And is that a good solution? So if you'd comment on these things.
So humans are the only, so mammal is a lactating animal, right, with mammary glands. And humans are the only mammal that consumes the milk of another mammal. And we're the only mammal that consumes any milk after infancy. So the notion that consuming cow's milk is somehow our biological imperative is rather odd from an evolutionary perspective. Humans have been only been doing it for a relative blip of time, and our bodies aren't really well cut out for it, which is why actually a majority of people on the planet are lactose intolerant. After infancy, our bodies can handle it when we're little, but then we kind of grow out of it. And so there's a lot of racism here with milk, actually, because mostly people of color around the world, generally speaking, it's only people of European descent that are able to handle lactose, typically, without getting indigestion. So as far as whether cows, well, they're not actually pregnant necessarily when they're providing milk, but they have been impregnated, and they've had babies who were, as Will was talking about, taken away from them at 1 day old, and then they continue to produce milk for quite some time until their production goes down, and then they're impregnated again. And it's this continuous cycle, and the boys are often turned into veal, and the girls are often turned into more milk cows. And so the milk industry is kind of inextricably linked with the whole system. It's very difficult to get away from that. In India, where cows are sacred traditionally, there are cows just running around everywhere, and they're not all producing milk all the time because traditionally it was actually considered wrong to kill them. Cows were considered holy and worshipped. So there are just cows all over the place, and cow poop all over the place too, I might add, having been there once during a monsoon storm and seen the water turn brown all around me as I walked home from school. Yeah, let's see, what was your other questions? That image is really stuck in my head now. I was really afraid I was going to float away.
The antibiotics in fish farms?
Antibiotics, yes, antibiotics are being used in fish farms. It's pretty dreadful. And I will add also, just so you have this picture in your head, that salmon farms, they're adding food coloring to the salmon farms' water because the salmon would be gray otherwise because they're not being fed their natural diet in there. But yes, antibiotics are routinely used in fish farms. They're literally put into the water so the fish will absorb it through their gills. And so this is also creating a whole other exposure point for antibiotic resistant bacteria to develop. Did I address it all? Okay.
Thanks, Ocean. I just want to add a couple of things. Oh, a break clap, please.
Thank you. Please don't stop.
I remember not too long ago, I was talking to a woman about dairy, and she was very well educated. She had a Ph.D. She was in Los Angeles, and she said, wait a minute, are you telling me that cows don't just give milk? And I said, they're like us. I mean, when a girl grows up to a certain age, she doesn't then reach puberty and then kind of walk down the street squirting milk out of her nipples, left and right, because now she can give milk. She gives milk for the same reason, like a cow gives milk for the same reason that a human does. We get pregnant, we give birth to a little baby, and the milk is for the baby. And this is something I realize that many people aren't aware of, actually, that basic thing. But I really want to emphasize a couple more things here, because I think it's very important to understand this, that cows would naturally live about 25 years. And on any dairy, organic or not, when they are about 5 years old, maximum, between 4 and 6 years old, they're killed. Because their production declines, because they're worn out, because they're kept pregnant and lactating simultaneously, and no mammal is designed to be pregnant and lactating simultaneously. And so when you impregnate, they're brought into heat typically early through prolactin and other hormones. And then they give birth to a baby, and as soon as the baby is born, the baby is stolen. And the irony is that the baby is then given soy milk, basically, to live, if they're going to keep the baby alive. But usually, most often, they just kill the babies, male or female. They kill them, or they use them for veal, male or female. They use them for veal. Sometimes the males they'll use for beef. Typically a cow will give birth to 4 babies, and one will become a slave on the dairy. The other 3, whatever gender they are, will be killed, either immediately or shortly thereafter. And typically what they do, actually, very often nowadays, is they'll have impregnate them one more time and send them off to slaughter when they're about 8 months pregnant, so that they get 2 for 1, basically, at the slaughterhouse, so that after they kill the mother and then they open her up, they have a baby in there that they can then, it's very profitable because there's renin in the calf's stomach, the unborn calf's stomach, so they'll take that out for making cheese. You need to coagulate the cheese, and so rennet is what is used from the renin in the lining of the calf's stomach. But the other thing is there's something called bovine fetal serum that is used in vaccinations. It's also actually ironically used in the creation of cell-based meat. So-called vegan meat is actually made from bovine fetal serum, and they'll put a long needle, into the heart and extract while the baby's still alive all this stuff, and then they'll kill the baby. So it's an abortion, a really violent abortion process that's done, millions of times on standard procedure now to get more money out of these cows. So on a very fundamental level, there's an enormous amount of violence in the dairy industry. It's like I say, it's a violence towards the female and the baby. And so what we're talking about with veganism, we're talking about ahimsa, which is non-violence. That's the basic idea. And it's kind of interesting because there's the Hare Krishna people have been really trying to figure out a way to have milk, because they just feel like, we should drink milk because Prabhupada, our teacher, said, dairy is sacred, and the whole thing is dairy is sacred. But they knew there was a lot of violence in the milk, so they decided to create a farm in West Virginia where they would have nonviolent milk, ahimsa milk. And so it's interesting to read about it because they bought quite a bit of land, they bought some cows, and they started the operation of never harming the cows, of loving the cows, of never killing the cows, and selling the milk to the other Hare Krishna devotees in the area. And what were they going to do with the males? Because they have to keep impregnating them, or their milk stops. They have to keep impregnating because the milk will dry up. So half the babies that are born, statistically, are males. So their idea was that they would have the males castrated and use them as oxen. So they could, that was one of the traditions. But of course, after a few oxen, they really didn't need any more, and the neighbors weren't interested. The neighbors said, "We have tractors, you can keep your oxen." So they had to feed them, basically. And so, and then as the years went by, there were more and more cows that they had to feed. A lot of them were males. A lot of them got to be too old to give milk. A lot of them were not old enough yet to give milk. So they got to this point where they had, maybe a couple of hundred cows, and only maybe 50 were giving milk. The other 150 they had to feed. So the price of their milk was skyrocketing because they had to pay for all that, and they needed to buy more land, and they had to feed all these cows. And finally, they just didn't know what to do, and they thought, well, the neighbors said that they would take. The neighbors said, well, we'll take your cows, and they said, well, you just promise you won't kill them. Oh, don't worry, we won't kill them. So that was how one of the ways they kind of solved the problem was they said, well, don't ask, don't tell. We'll just kind of give them to the neighbors, and of course the neighbors are getting free meat, and this was for the ahimsa milk. So you really have to understand clearly, clear as a bell, you cannot have dairy without killing. Just really have to understand that. I mean, you have to kill the babies because you have to impregnate so many. You can't have the milk without impregnating. And I saw that when I was in India. It's very clear because you have all these cows wandering the streets and they're starving. They're eating plastic because when their production declines, they just let them go. They either send them to market, which means they get slaughtered in another state that allows the slaughtering of cows, or they let them go and they're wandering and they're horribly abused. They get eaten by dogs at night and so forth. I mean, it's really a terrible situation for these cows. They have no protection, really. And the interesting thing, I think, also is that this dairy cult in India is all about, everyone is eating dairy. The white revolution has been promoted by the government to try to push everybody to eat more dairy products. The diabetes rate in India has just gone through. They have the highest rate of diabetes in the world now. And the interesting thing also, I think that's connected probably, is that the rate of violence towards women is the highest in the world in India. Delhi is the most dangerous city in the world to be a woman in terms of getting beaten and abused. There's a direct connection between violence towards women and violence towards female animals. I mean, I think that's very clear, and that this is the way it's created. So we have to wake up again and realize that the dairy industry, if anyone's interested in liberation and equality, we can't be eating dairy products. This is the absolute antithesis of any kind of liberation for us as human beings in our relationships with each other.